Parenting can be a lot like taming wild beasts, and some kids are more beastly than others. Of course, I mean that in the most adorable sense of the word. I have a few kids who are generally agreeable and easygoing. They want to please me, and they pick up on social cues of how to behave in specific situations. When it's time to come home from the park, they understand and they follow me to the car. You put a metaphorical bridle in their mouths, and they follow you around the training ring, nuzzling your neck once in a while. And then I have a couple of wild stallions. They take one look at a bridle or saddle in any form, and they're bucking around the ring like crazed lunatics. When they have to leave the park, there is yelling and screaming and gnashing of teeth. Or they just completely ignore me. It often ends with me hauling them to the car like a sack of potatoes. A sack of screaming, flailing, biting potatoes. I stumbled upon this horse analogy while reading the book Seabiscuit last year. I don't know much about horses, but I love this book. First of all, Laura Hillenbrand's writing is just delicious. Second of all, it's a really great story. But when I got to the part where trainer Tom Smith started working with Seabiscuit, I realized this is not just a book about a horse. This is one of the best parenting books I've ever read. This is the How She Moms podcast, where we talk about how different moms solve the same problems. I'm Whitney Archibald, a mom of 5 kids myself. I collect ideas so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about 10 things I learned about parenting from reading the book Seabiscuit, An American Legend. I know this seems like an unlikely book to find lessons about parenting, but reading about how the brilliant Tom Smith helped shape Seabiscuit from a wild and clumsy troublemaker to one of the most successful racehorses in history inspires me to help my own little Seabiscuits reach their potential. So the first lesson is just that, recognizing potential. When Tom Smith first laid eyes on Seabiscuit, he was a mess. I'm going to try not to quote too much in this podcast, but I had to share this one. When asked to run, he would drop low over the track and fall into a comical version of what horsemen call an egg beater gait, making a spastic sideways flailing motion with his left foreleg as he swung it forward, as if he were swatting at flies. His gallop was so disorganized that he had a maddening tendency to whack himself in the front ankle with his own hind hoof. One observer compared his action to a duck waddle. Somehow, Smith saw something in this mess of a horse. He didn't walk past him and let him become somebody else's problem. He recognized a spark of spirit and greatness in this horse. He saw real grit. He introduced his employer, racehorse owner Charles Howard, to the horse. And he said, "Get me that horse. He has real stuff in him. I can improve him." Howard was also quick to catch the vision. Seabiscuit actually came right up to him and head bumped him. And from that minute on, Charles was smitten. He knew that he needed to buy this horse. And so he did. We all know what this feels like, falling hard for our babies. Whenever it happens for you, the first time you lay eyes on them, the first finger grab or smile, you're a goner. You know these babies will do great things. You look into their little faces and see endless possibilities and potential. But babies, like Seabiscuit, are also kind of a train wreck. They scream, they make messes, they keep us up all hours of the night, some more than others. And then they get older. They resist and disobey. They still keep you up at night, worrying about how to help them through one challenge or another. Smith and Howard reminded me that even though we have our worries and trouble ahead, if we keep sight of our child's potential and identify their strengths, we can help them do great things and overcome their challenges. They've all got a bit of Seabiscuit in them, the difficult bits and the remarkable bits. The second lesson I learned is what Smith called defusing the horse. Seabiscuit did not get any better once they moved him to his new home. Nobody could come near him. Every time the grooms tried to brush him or care for him, he would lunge at them, attack them. He wanted nothing to do with anyone. Smith obviously couldn't let this kind of behavior continue. No one could brush him, let alone ride him. So he decided he had to defuse the horse. Another quote, "Ignoring the snapping jaws and pinned ears, he showered him with affection and carrots." This is hard for me to do. When one of my kids is refusing to do what I ask, throwing a tantrum, or even calling me names, the last thing I want to do is shower them with love and throw them a carrot. I'm more likely to want to chuck one at their heads. For me, reacting with love rather than anger requires a lot of deep breathing and self-talk. I have to remind myself, don't get angry, you love this kid. Often I have to remove myself from the situation for a few minutes and give myself a mom timeout. But Smith's approach is a great reminder to draw on that deep unconditional love we have for our kids, even when we don't especially like the way they're acting at that moment. This doesn't mean we reward them for their tantrums, but it means we react in a way that shows empathy and love instead of just a knee-jerk reaction. Number 3 is to study the horse. This is my absolute favorite takeaway from this book. Smith really studied Seabiscuit. Hillenbrand writes, as he did with every new horse, Smith pored over Seabiscuit when he was with him and mulled him over when he was not. So he didn't just go in and make assumptions about Seabiscuit's character or how he would be able to train him. He could have just tried approaches that had been successful with all of his other horses, but instead, he patiently learned all he could about Seabiscuit before customizing a training program for his unique quirks, weaknesses, and talents. This really inspired me to take a step back and just watch my children, to observe them and see how they react in certain situations. What motivates them? What aggravates them? What makes them happy? And what makes them laugh? Studying my kids has also helped me to notice which times of the day or situations are trigger points for certain children. For example, it helped me realize that the reason one of my sons was picking on the other is that he was feeling left out of a game the other kids were playing. Once I notice what's really going on, then I can make systematic changes to help smooth out those trouble spots. This anthropological approach to child rearing applies to positive things as well as negative. Kids are amazing and fascinating. Standing back and watching them can reveal talents and positive attributes you didn't realize they had. Sometimes I picture myself being the Jane Goodall of my family, just sitting back and observing what my kids are doing and learning about them from these actions. The fourth thing Smith did was really interesting. He experimented with different companions. One of the first things Smith did when Seabiscuit moved into his new stable was to try to forge a connection between Seabiscuit and another animal. His first attempt was a disaster. He put a goat named Whiskers in Seabiscuit's stall. This arrangement did not last long at all. Seabiscuit grabbed the goat in his mouth and then threw him right over the door. Oops. Then Smith tried Pumpkin, a Montana cow pony. Success. These horses lived and worked together for the rest of their lives. Soon, this twosome was joined with a dog named Pocatello and Jojo the spider monkey. They even slept together, all of them snuggling around Seabiscuit like a happy family. This works for kids too. Some combinations work way better than others. Some of the attributes that make one of my sons difficult for his older brothers to get along with, his high energy and tendency to take charge, make him an ideal companion for a toddler. He can entertain my youngest for hours. Some of my kids pair really well with each other for cleaning a room, but not for sleeping in it together. Others can share a room no problem. Some combinations are great for tutoring or creative play, and babies can have a magical effect on any sibling. Number 5 is to keep them healthy. When Smith took charge of his training, Seabiscuit was terribly thin and underweight. One person even said that his hips could have made a passable hat rack. He had a hurt left foreleg, and he tired really easily. So Smith quickly turned to taking care of his physical needs. He put liniment on his legs and covered them in bandages. He fed him high-quality hay, calcium, and special oats. And he made him a good, clean bed. Isn't this so applicable to our children? Sometimes the best way to help them perform better is just to pay attention to their physical needs. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating well and at the right times? One of my sons, in particular, is a slave to his stomach. If he doesn't eat immediately upon waking, we all have a hurricane in the morning. Number 6 is to provide structure. After a brief honeymoon period of letting Seabiscuit keep his own hours, Smith implemented a strict schedule for the horse. Seabiscuit woke up at 4:30. They groomed him. He took a long gallop with Pumpkin. He walked to cool down, and then he got bathed and bandaged. They fed him at the same time each day and gave him a bedtime. Again, very applicable to children. My children all benefit from a schedule. This is never more obvious than the last few weeks of summer when I've given up on my summer schedule. As much fun as it is to relax and loosen up sometimes, kids thrive when they know what to expect, and especially when they're eating and sleeping at regular times. Just, again, taking care of those basic needs. Again, just making sure those basic needs are being met on a consistent schedule. Number 7 is another hard one. It's just being patient and consistent. Seabiscuit hated the starting gate, which is kind of important if you're going to be running a race. When Smith would put him in that starting gate, he would throw himself around just trying to get out of there. So Smith started a routine where he would tap him whenever he moved in the starting gate. He wasn't hitting him, he was just tapping him as a reminder. Morning after morning, Smith taught him to hold still and wait for the gate to open. It took a long time, but eventually, Seabiscuit was able to tolerate that starting gate. Smith said, "You've got to go at a horse slowly, teaching him most anything. Easy, firm repetition does it." Insert child into that quote, and this tip needs no more explanation. Number 8 is to embrace the wild side. The very things that make my most spirited children so difficult to parent are what makes them so much fun to parent. I want my kids to be passionate, gritty, opinionated, emotional people. It's just really hard when they're all like that, all at once. During an early race, Smith detected attributes that hinted at his future glory. Seabiscuit's future glory. He said, "He showed me 2 great qualifications that day. He showed me speed and he showed me courage. He was in trouble, and the way he pricked his ears, I knew if I could get the true speed out of him, I would have a champion." The very spirit and passion that made Seabiscuit so unruly were the same character traits that eventually made him a legend. So much of our job as parents is to figure out our children's gifts and help them to channel them. In her book, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee, Wendy Mogul talks about the Jewish concept of Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse that is also the source of all passion and creativity. She encourages parents to identify their children's most difficult and unruly traits, their Yetzer Hara, if I'm pronouncing that right, and then to look at these traits as the seeds of greatness. For example, she says that you can think of your stubborn or whining child as persistent, your complaining child as discerning, your argumentative child as forthright and outspoken, your loud child as exuberant, and your shy child as cautious and modest. Okay, so number 9 is to work with your jockey. Smith made it a point to meet frequently with Seabiscuit's jockey, Red Pollard. Each of them had a different perspective and relationship with the horse, and together they were able to fine-tune his training. Likewise, every mom needs somebody that she can talk to about her kids. If you're married, you and your spouse have different relationships with your child. You can each learn different things about them and can offer a different perspective. If you don't have that, or even if you do, you can also team up with a teacher or another close family member or friend to gain insight and brainstorm ideas. The final and 10th point that I learned from this book was to know when to back off. When Smith eventually got Seabiscuit out on the racetrack, he started rampaging again. Hillenbrand writes, "Instead of directing his efforts against his opponents, he was directing them against the handlers who tried to force him to run. He habitually met every command with resistance. He was feeding off the fight, gaining satisfaction from the distress and rage of the man on his back." Does this sound familiar? To me, it sounds like an average night at the dinner table. But here's Hillenbrand again. Smith knew how to stop it. He had to take coercion out of the equation and let the horse discover the pleasure of speed. He called out to the rider, "Let him go." This is a beautiful principle for parenting. This is where you stop trying to coax your daughter to wear the cute jumper you just bought her and let her wear her tutu and sweatpants to the park. It's so tempting to micromanage kids and to want to mold them to meet your expectations. We want them to do their chores our way on our timetable. We sign them up for the sports or activities we like or the ones we want them to like. But if we're going to find out who these children of ours really are, sometimes we have to let them go and see what activities they gravitate to on their own. Here's Hillenbrand again. After a wild ride, Smith met Seabiscuit with a carrot. Neither Smith nor his exercise rider had raised a hand to him, but the colt had learned the lesson that would transform him from a rogue to a pliant, happy horse. He would never again be forced to do what he didn't want to do. He never again fought a rider. So this may be where the analogy ends. We obviously can't just let our kids decide. they're going to sit at home and play video games, school be darned. But I do think there's value in backing off. It's good to let children have freedom and be in charge of their own schedule once in a while to see what they choose to do when no one is telling them what to do. Backing off is one of the hardest things to do as a parent, especially when we can see an easy solution. Sometimes, though, the child has to figure out how to solve a problem on his or her own. And ultimately, the only way they learn personal responsibility is if we stop micromanaging and let them make their own decisions. Of course, Seabiscuit ultimately proved all his critics wrong. Once he won his first race after his 50th start and started to live up to his potential, he was a force to be reckoned with. Hillenbrand says, the colt was transformed. In the barn, he became a disarmingly affectionate glutton, as gentlemanly a horse, marveled Smith, as I ever handled. On the track, once the forum for rebellion, he displayed blistering speed and bulldog tenacity. This is the potential for all of our little Seabiscuits, and it's part of what makes parenting so exciting and rewarding, helping our children to discover their talents and passions and then letting them run.